So, Mr. Mason. When you wrote She Arrives, like, where did you get the idea from? The idea that we all have to serve?
Oh, from existing. Yeah,
Okay.
it's just a biography of contemporary life. It's not like fictional, really. It was just like condensing some general premises of life in contemporary capitalism into a performance to try and make people laugh, because there's collectivity in laughter.
So briefly, the play is about a young woman who lives in London, trying to make a life for herself, and she's reflecting on the working conditions, I guess.
Yeah, so she decides to get revenge. She decides that just like so much violence has been done to her, like discursive violence as well as kind of material violence, like exclusion from property ownership, when property ownership is the only kind of like measure of value of your life, that she decides to enact direct violence, thinking that that's the only reasonable solution. So a kind of silly violence, like she breaks into this man's house and she turns the dial on his washing machine up so all his clothes come out tiny. She puts like full fat like lard in all his fat-free food and stuff like that, and tries to sort of fatten him up, and then she realises that obviously fattening people up and making them look silly is precisely what capital has done to her class forever. So she was fighting the wrong battle.
Okay.
But that's where
I remember a specific example I remember was putting hair removal cream into his anti-hair loss shampoo.
Yeah. Particularly pertinent to my life, that one.
Yeah, have you done that to someone?
No, just because I'm going bald, so it's like it was a premonition of my own future or something.
Okay.
It was like, you can't do that to me because I've already made that joke.
Yeah.
That was the kind of thing. It's like, now you can't make me lose my hair, you bastard capitalism, because now it's my joke. Now
Yeah,
it's not your joke.
Right. So yeah, there was like a certain amount of anger at the beginning of that play, I remember, from the main character towards the society that had put her in this position where they hadn't even asked her. I think the question was, how do you want to serve? And she wasn't even asked if she wanted to serve and who she was serving and what.
Yeah.
Like, how much is that like a anger that you feel?
I think that's what I remember from school, from these. We used to have like I can't remember what they were called, but it was something like a career guidance, I don't know, overlord or something, who sort of came in with like a Kalashnikov and said, what do you want to be? And your options were basically like in the army, or a fireman, or for the women in the school was like have kids. Those were our options. I mean, now it sounds like I grew up in the 1940s, but like it was the 1990s, but like still, or 2000s as well. But I mean, like, no, okay, so it was in like I don't know. Basically, there was like, you went into the army if you had a cock, and you became a hairdresser if you didn't have a cock. And that was about what was going on. So the options weren't what do you want to do. The options were, which of the very limited options that we give you are you willing to sort of force yourself into the habit of? Which are you willing to get used to was the option. It wasn't which do you actually want to do. There was no will in any of this. There was no like desire. Well, there was no real like dream.
Was that like, did you directly decide you wanted to be a writer in response to that, or was there some time in between where you just kind of wandered around trying to figure it out?
Yeah, I don't know if I already wanted to be a writer, I don't know, but I think soon afterwards I did want to. I don't really remember the moment when that happened, but like, I don't know, thinking like, I suppose I was listening to like Tracy Chapman and Nina Simone and Odetta, and like Bob Dylan and like Leonard Cohen, and these people who I thought had kind of subverted this, like the sort of binary of like work limitations of like, okay, the rest of your life will be in reproducing some kind of capital in some kind of labour that you're not interested in, because you just have to produce like a family, you just have to produce more labourers and stuff, and so these are basically the options you can have. You can go into crime, or you can go into the army, or if you really want to be an absolute nerd and get like taken the piss out of by all of your peers, you can become a teacher, and that's about it. And those people seem to be like presenting authentically what seemed to me at the time is like a kind of radical argument of like work might not be, or like simple capitalist reproductive work might not be the sort of be all and end all of life. There might be something else. And then so I thought, wow, man, I wish I was radical like them.
Okay. So like they were all musicians, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was because I was a div. I wasn't reading anything at the time. I was listening to music instead.
Yeah, I think I was the same, actually. And made a similar decision.
Took me years to get into realising that, you know,
it was the
there were
words
theorists and stuff, and there were other people saying more complex arguments, but of generally the same things. I don't know, I read a lot of theory and I think, well, Lou Reed says this in 3 minutes. Why do you say it in 400 pages? Like,
yeah. Yeah, so it strikes me that you're talking mainly about musicians, and your description of what they did describes artists generally, not just musicians and not just writers. So it seems like the kind of the main focus to you was a kind of way of organising your time and a way of like
yeah, well, I think as
avoiding a separation between work and life, and
that was one thing definitely, and the sort of thing of like the general like poetry of these things, not in a kind of like cheesy hippie way, but in the sense of like it being poesis, it being like poesis is creation in Greek. It had like this is not just reproduction of like the value form of capital. This is not just like manipulating the sort of mediations of value. This is actual creation of something that couldn't have existed before. That sort of collective effort of the like the creation that comes about, like
right,
you know, like that, some Lou Reed album or something that changes the ideas of millions of people, that comes about by that kind of collective effort of all those people in like that particular like space and time of like New York in the 70s.
So like literally to be a kind of mouthpiece for your community.
Yeah, and like, but like absolute creation, like as poesis, like this is really like these people as poets, as creators, as people who create, not just reproducing value that already exists, which is like in capital, like just extracting value from something which is there, from either like, you know, fuel or slaves or something like that, but rather like actual creation of value, of like a new perspective.
Okay. How is the creation of a new perspective opposed to the extraction of value from something which is already there? Because to like intuitively, I kind of know what you mean, but I'm struggling with.
Because I suppose like in like capitalist extraction, where you can sort of reproduce value in some very limited, determinate ways that are given to you at school and stuff, is always going to be some kind of individual self-blinding effort. Like I'm gonna like shut myself away in this office where I can reproduce that kind of value, that kind of like reproduce money in that way, in this like accountant's office or whatever, and shut myself off there. And I'm like the absorber of that information, and I just sort of mediate it into other streams. Like I take the money of some, some business person, and I turn it into a mortgage or something like that. When I get my little dog and my miserable kids or something. Whereas
it seems
the poet is not extracting the poet as creator, not as just poet, like someone who just writes collections of poetry, but the poet as effort of creation, is not extracting, is not like mediating sources of pre-existent value which are created by maybe like geological time or by like factory labor or something, but rather by like a novel introduction of something which wasn't
right. So there's a break somewhere.
Yeah,
because
so
it seems to me that a poet might be mediating the kind of materials in his environment or her environment, but nonetheless, whatever's created acts as some kind of impasse in what came before and what will come next. There's a separation and the idea that something genuinely new, whereas when you described extracting value from X and turning it into a mortgage, the idea being that it would be swallowed up again immediately and the cycle would just go round and round and round, so you'd be trapped in this circle.
Like the great kind of myth that capitalism is somehow produces new things.
Right,
It does the opposite. It does this reproduce value in slightly different guises, but like from the iPhone 4 to the iPhone 10 or whatever, like it's just like minor variations on the same kind of thing. Whereas like that, so there's like a total rupture in time in the poem. Like I don't know, when I read something like say A.K. Blakemore's poetry, for example, it feels like a perfect description of contemporary life as like a person in London. Which, we could go into like who actually can experience that, because I think it is implicitly racialized and gendered and things like that. But still, like basically, it seems from like, I don't know, my point of view as a reader, as like a very perfect description of like the now of contemporary London. But in order to access that, you have to have like a total rupture of any stream of like the past or the future. There isn't really any possibility for this poetry. It's just now. Like it creates like a block of nowness that becomes that poem.
And it's like in a similar way to Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, or Nina Simone or someone. So you have this experience when you read it or listen to it, which completely transports you for a matter of minutes or whatever, and you feel literally like that break becomes a break you're given. Like you just get a break from whatever stress or pressure you're under for a little period of time, and achieving that is something. Like if you can do that for other people,
and what follows is not a continuation. What
right.
follows is not a continuation of what was before. What follows is like a new, like a reimagined possibility because of this rupture. Those kind of.
So like the next thing I wanted to ask is the best way to lead into that. Then is to say that there's something that you experienced a joy in that you want to then reproduce that joy and give that to other people.
Yeah.
To become that joy and thereby like feel it all the time, or at least to keep it in existence and know that whatever happens to you, you've been a part of the life of this one joyful project or thing that's been going on for however long. The next question I was going to ask is about the thing I explained to you before, which was that there seems to be three different, arguably more, but I can think of three different ways of interpreting work, which is either as a purely financial exchange, time for money, or as some kind of social obligation, as part of the economy to produce, or at least to remain part of the economic growth through being able to consume things. or whether there's a greater social function, like actually fulfilling the needs of other people, meeting the needs of other people, or whether it's about identity and passion. And you just articulated a way in which it's kind of all three, I think, for you. Or at least in the life of the artist, those separations don't emerge.
Well, I think like, yeah, maybe, but the first two seem to me to be like the same. So the production of of capitalist time through the socially necessary labour time of the worker is necessarily going to sort of is necessarily going to be like in a kind of expenditure of their own lifetime, and in fact produces the value of that worker's lifetime. You know, the lifetime of a CEO of a tech company in San Francisco is worth thousands of lifetimes of a miner in the Congo. You know, like by their giving time to the production of value, they become.
Can I just make a distinction then? The distinction between whether work equals time for money and money for time, or whether it's the fulfillment of some social responsibility.
Right. Yeah.
Like the distinction is not, you know, if we're saying that time for money is a furtherment of the interests of capital, then those two are the same. But if there's a distinction between them, it's that the second one, i.e. there being some social responsibility, implies some kind of moral arbiter that goes beyond just the reproduction of the economy.
Yeah, well then...
so is there, like, you know, people who work in public services, in care jobs, in education, in healthcare, in policy, or in the third sector, whatever it is, there are some people at least who work not because it's necessarily their passion, although it might be, and not necessarily because it pays well, although it might, but because they believe in what they do.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the distinction between the first and second. But just my question to you is just, like, how did you come to understand? It seemed like in one fell swoop when you were a kid, you were listening to Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen, and you understood a way of living that was socially like valuable, joyful, and you know, could be a passion, and also like maybe you could make money out of it, and make the last one is the biggest if you can actually make a life at that.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess at some point in my life there was some hope that it would be like inclusive of everything. It would be like, you know, satisfy the more kind of capitalist desires of my family or something. As like, you know, we want this person to have some kind of contentment in the regime we live in, so like, you know, to be able to live, obviously, and to have some kind of social meaning by like creation of something, even if it is esoteric, it's at least pleasing to that crowd that is involved in the esotericism, because I mean, poetry has a tiny audience, you know, like it's tiny. Theatre has a tiny audience. At least my theatre does, anyway. And so it's not like, it's not for, well, I would like it to be for everyone, but obviously it's not. And so, I don't know, I guess at some point there was some kind of hope of all those things being possible, but I think, like, after so many years of, like, trying so hard to get to that position where I can live off writing, I've, like, long ago left any hope of thinking that it could ever be, like, amenable to a, like, individually sustaining capitalist life. Like, it pays for me to pay my rent in my room and to pay for food and beer and stuff, and that it would have some kind of, like, socially productive values, and that it would be, like, autonomously creative of something new.
What happened? What happened in between?
Well, years of failure, like 10 years of failure, like getting constantly rejected, like doing fucking shit jobs for the last 10 years.
Okay.
And having to basically like work in restaurants and work in bars and work teaching the things that I'm not interested in teaching at all in order to make enough money to continue
Teaching what?
teaching like English as a foreign language, which is just basically. I mean, it can be kind of fun, but it's not like it's certainly not something I'm actually interested in. I don't really want to be in that classroom.
Okay.
It's better money than working in a pub, you know.
But you started writing novels at quite a young age, though, right? Like when I last asked you, you'd written 14 novels. I think that was about 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and we were like in our early to mid 20s.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I just kept trying, and then every time they failed, I was just like, well, it's obviously shit then, I'll have to go for something else.
So write another one.
And then,
So, can you give us a rough number of like how many novels you've written?
I don't think I've written any more since then. I mean,
Okay, yeah, sorry, we started again.
And
So-
then, well, I've tried like various ways of doing that. So there's basically like a triptych, like a kind of 3-layer thing of work, where it's like the base layer, which is like buried in the mud, is all the crap, and like is the millions of jobs I've had in restaurants and schools, and in like at the moment I work part time in a waitering agency where I go and do like night shifts at like, you know, fucking standing by the door and collecting dirty glasses in a nightclub or something for about 10 quid an hour, when I don't make enough money from the part-time teaching that I do in 2 separate schools. Until last week I worked in the pub, but altercations because of my radical desire to read. You're not allowed to read in the pub apparently, but you are allowed to look at your phone. But I was reading a book, so I got kicked out. And then on like the sort of level which is about of like the height of your knees is like the academic level, which like I'm about to start a PhD, so it's like the level of trying to invest some kind of socially productive time in things that I think are really important, which is definitely like hard work, but it's something which is really strange because people just don't consider it work. Like, because most of the time where you're researching a PhD, you're sitting in your room, like reading books that you got from the library and studying like different essays on JSTOR and whatnot online. And people are like, oh, but you're just sitting at home all day. That sounds great. You sit in your room all day, just like drinking coffee, da da da. You don't even get dressed until the evening, you know. It's like it's a kind of like, so there's a kind of, that kind of annoys me when people like have that kind of total binary view of work. Like if you're not basically like strangled by your tie with a fucking noose around your neck and strung up to like the boss's balls, then you're not really a worker, you know. And it's like, well, PhD is pretty hard work as well, but
hard work and like incredibly competitive and very difficult to get any money for.
Yeah,
like, it's not an easy thing at all.
Yeah, and then so the third layer after that is like the sort of the celestial, intangible dream of poetry, which is why like the like corporeal level of university is necessary in order to sort of get involved in that sort of community, right? Because that like the community thing of writing is so important. It's not about one person's creation. That's like the silly myth of writing.
Yeah, so when people are disparaging of academics and writers for spending all their time indulgently with their own thoughts by themselves, I guess the thing is that it can actually be like that, but it shouldn't, right? The idea isn't. The idea is not that the book is, you know, the product of one author, or like, it's supposed to be a communication. Yeah,
definitely, yeah, and it's like it's a. Oh, this sounds kind of cheesy, but like it's some kind of like transcendent thing as well, right? It connects to everyone sort of you've ever read, even though having said that, at the start of Richard Scott's great collection of poetry, Soho, he in like the acknowledgements part, he thanks loads of like dead poets. He thanks like Shakespeare and Cavafy and people like that, and it's like, I don't know, I thought that was going a bit far with the whole like, you know, the community of like ahistorical writership, like everyone ever who's written a poem. I thought that was a bit much, but generally, like, to implicitly acknowledge that without actually putting their names into the acknowledgement section of your Faber and Faber collection, you know. But yeah, so like, there's well, the thing is, because I started with just like the first of all mud and celestial binary of like working in shitty jobs that I hated, and with the dream of poetry. Now I realised
Battery's gonna run out. Just a sec. Keep going.
Now I realised that was totally the wrong thing to do. That was stupid. I had to find the body in the middle of it, which was involving myself in other people's work by studying them, by taking an absolutely like deadly interest in them, that they are everything. Other poets.
Sweet. Leave it at that.